Have you ever thought, making normal Geometry Dash levels is cool and all, but what I really want to do is design 3D games in Geometry Dash? Well, me neither, but after wasting over 6,000 hours in the GD editor, I decided it was about time to go up a notch, or rather a dimension. But actually half a dimension. You see, the level I made may look 3D, but it's faked. It's a trick, an illusion. Why is that? Well, that's part of what I'm going to try to explain in this video. By the way, if you haven't seen the 3D level I'm talking about yet, go watch it now. It will give you some important context. Okay, so, how did I make this? Well, many of you have been commenting that it looks like a game from the 80s and 90s, especially Doom and Wolfenstein 3D have been coming up a lot. The reason they look so similar is because the method I used to create my level is heavily inspired by a common pseudo 3D rendering technique called raycasting that was used a lot around that time. So, what is raycasting? Well, it's basically a way to render a 2D scene in 3D even though it's still 2D. So, it's kind of a trick to make things look 3D without calculating all the complicated 3D stuff. So what it does is it has a player and a scene in 2D, and it casts a ray from the player towards the scene. And when it hits something on the scene, it calculates the distance from the place it collided to the player. And if that distance is very long, it draws a short line on the screen. And if it's very short, it draws a long line on the screen, because if something is close to you, it appears bigger. So it does this for every single column of pixels on the screen. So it casts another ray here, this one is a bit longer, therefore this one should be shorter, and so on, so forth, until it's gone through all the pixels on the screen. Like that. And then in the end, it will look something like this. And this is also why all the walls are the same height, because it's only a 2D image just drawn so it looks like 3D. That's also why it's called pseudo 3D or 2.5D, because it's not actually 3D, just looks like it. Okay, so how did I implement this in GD? Well, if you look through all the objects, you won't find any such thing as a ray object. So I had to get creative. My idea was to use collision objects and put many of them in a line, so I could know where the collision is happening. So this is the basic demonstration of how the ray works. So this is a ray, it consists of many collision objects, as I said, and each of those collision objects is controlled by two of these collision triggers. And it basically says if this collision object collides with the scene, it toggles on a group, in this case one of these lines, and if it goes out of the scene, it toggles it off again. So therefore, it looks like when the ray comes closer, the lines get progressively bigger. Therefore, when the ray approaches the scene, it looks like there's a wall coming towards you. Like that. And you can imagine, if we have a bunch of those rays next to each other, it can render the scene to look like it's 3D. However, as it turns out, this yields quite wonky results sometimes, and if I'm not happy with an array of rays, I had to build all these triggers all over again. Therefore, I made a little script to handle this part so that I could easily change important parameters until I got it just the way I wanted. After that, I just make 2D maps of each room out of collision blocks. I actually kinda made two of those engines I made earlier on top of each other, so that I could have two different types of walls, one dangerous one and one not so dangerous one. The engines left me with only 100 groups left before I reached the 999 group limit, so I had to be smart about how I used my last few groups. But after making player controls, a level system, and some basic movement, the game was pretty much infinitely expandable. So this is basically what the final result looks like. Here you can see we have the player, this little circle here of collision objects, and all these tiny collision objects here are all part of one of the rays. And this is kind of the position of the camera, so it's right behind the player. And this X is the checkpoint, so every time you die, you go back to that X. So these are the levels. They're just made of collision blocks. The ones are normal walls and 2 are the red dangerous walls. These are all like player movement and what happens when you progress to the next level and stuff like that. So if we go all the way here, you can see here all the collision triggers that control what you see on the screen. Yeah, so you can see each one of these controls one of the columns in the screen right here. So if you look closely, when I go through each of the layers, you can see that the scene kind of gets smaller. That's because each of them controls walls that are further behind in the scene. GD can't render all of these at once, that's why it looks kind of weird.